One of the things I'm really curious about is what helps you create in the face of what silences so many women. I mean, you've got four kids, you got a mansplaining internet trolls that like to pop up. What allows you to create despite that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thanks for having me. This is so fun. I think what keeps me going is that the alternative is so sad. The
Mm,
alternative to be quiet, to be silent, to kind of go off the radar, to retreat, is such a sad thought. It's tempting a lot of times, but there's so many different reasons not to write. Our own, ego, fear of failure. There's so many different reasons, not just internet trolls. And I always just come back to the alternative, being really sad. So I think that's what keeps me going.
that's beautiful. I can feel that. Yeah, it is really sad to think about silencing ourselves most of all.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm fascinated by is how people find their creative forms. Sometimes people just lock right on it, and sometimes they never find it, and sometimes they have to switch. And you said in another interview to write poetry, thought you had to be a grad student smoking a pipe. But then I kind of just went for it. You would look good with a pipe. But I just kind of went for it. I started writing and I couldn't stop. Was there a moment when the light bulb went on or the self permission? Because poetry, especially like, oh, poetry.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. I don't think it was, I don't really think was a moment. I think a lot of times we look for moments, or, what Oprah
Mhm.
calls aha moments, which can happen for sure. But what I've noticed is most things have come at such a slow burn. And I think poetry was like that. I was kind of cheating on my novel with poetry very casually. It wasn't like I was like, oh my God, I think I can write poetry, so now I'm going to write this book and pitch it to publishers. It was more like, okay, I'm going to focus a little bit more time to this. I'm going to, work on this. And I don't think it was quite a moment.
Mhm.
There have been moments of gratification and validation and success and happiness for sure. But I wouldn't call that any kind of aha moment. Instead, it was more a slow burn and feeling more and more comfortable in that genre, and realizing that the only one holding me back from poetry is myself. It's nobody else. Nobody else cares if I write poetry or not. I'm the one who has to care. So, yeah, but I know sometimes, you kind of want that moment, but it
I
often does
don't
not
think they
happen for
come
me.
very often. And when they do,
No.
they're usually in the rearview mirror. And it's almost like our brain
Yeah.
decides to make it that moment,
Right.
right?
Of
And we sort of
course.
rewrite because
Yeah.
we have, our memories are our memories are
Yes.
completely unreliable.
Constantly rewriting
Uh,
history.
yes.
I'll hear myself say things in interviews, and later I'm like, is that even true? Or is that the story I've been telling over and over?
Oh my
Uh,
God, yes. I wrote a lot of personal stories in my last book, Why Bother? And I thought that every time I was writing one of them, I'm like, you're like, what if this is, I'm trying for the truth, but what do I really
yeah.
remember?
Hmm.
There were so many things that you said. So one of the things that, just to take people back who don't know your story, that you started writing as a blogger, and I'm going to use that terrible term that makes me really want to throw up in my throat, mommy blogger. And then your mommy blogging really took off, but you shut that down and started working on a thriller. And did it, the form of talking about your own life and being a parent, become less satisfying, or
It felt really tired. I was also living it in such a real way that I was like sick of it. I didn't really want to talk about it anymore. Also, the mommy blogger scene was changing at a rapid pace to something that was very much a good for her, not for me situation. And so I felt like I really need to step back from this. I'm not enjoying it. I'm not enjoying being part of this. I I
no,
understand.
what does that mean, good for her?
Good for her, not for me. Have you? Okay,
Yeah.
so Amy Poehler says that in her book. She has kind of coined that phrase. where you don't have to knock other women down. I don't want to say, I don't want to be a mommy blogger and then put all the mommy bloggers down. That's not my intention at all. It was more like, that's fine for them and I'm happy for them and I'm happy to cheer the women on who I know who do that, but it's not for me. And I felt
Mhm.
that this is not for me anymore for so many different reasons. One of those reasons being there were just all of a sudden, Instagram was becoming a thing and sponsored posts and kind of having to sell yourself as a brand, which we all do that to some extent, myself included. But I
Self
just wasn't,
included.
I did not want to go down that path in that way. I did not want my kids on the internet anymore. There were just so many different things. And also, most of all, I wanted to take a break from personal narrative. I felt very burnt out in that after 10 years. I just was not, I just was ready to take a break and head into fiction. And it was just the most welcome break. I never, I don't want to say I never looked back, because I certainly still write that at times and might, write a book like that in the future, but I just really needed to take a break and I didn't, it felt right away.
There's something else back a moment ago. I was thinking about identity and how we identify with ourselves as a certain kind of creator. Do you identify more as a writer who will explore lots of forms in your life?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. People, because I have this book out, often when they're
Two books,
introducing
about to
me,
have two books out, right?
yeah, they
Yeah.
introduced me as poet Kate Baer, which is so
Yeah.
funny to me because I just started taking poetry seriously like 5 minutes ago. I've written poetry all my life, but I would have never written that. Would have never said a few years ago, this is what I want to be. And I'm happy to take on that label. It's a beautiful label, but I see myself kind of in any genre. So that's funny that you have not been asked that. But yeah, I do feel very open. I never would have predicted poetry. So why try to predict anything else? I don't know what will come.
But I think that is incredibly important. And it's really hard for some of
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
especially if you've had success, which now you've had incredible success as a poet.
Yeah.
That, to let one of the things I really like about reading about your life and now talking to you is there's a real openness and curiosity and almost a fealty. How do you say that word? A loyalty
Yeah.
to yourself above the marketplace or the form or does that ring true or am I projecting all over you?
I mean, that's what I try. That's a nice thing to say. That's what I try, just because, like I said, I never would have predicted this. So if I would have boxed myself out of poetry, I wouldn't have written, the last two books. And so I try to keep going on at that pace and just see what happens and try to read as much as I can of all sorts of different genres and be open to, where this path leads, wherever it leads.
Mm-hmm. I love that. What do you think silences creative women the most when you talk to creative women or when they tell you in your comments on Instagram?
I hear a lot of things about, well, for mothers, I hear a lot of things about childcare, which is absolutely valid. I hear a lot about other people, but I really do think it comes down to ourselves. We are our biggest obstacles, our fear of failure. It's easy to point the blame at other people because, and our situations, because that's easier. It's like, well, I can't do this because of X. And then it kind of gives ourselves an out.
Mhm.
And I really do think the biggest obstacle to creativity is ourselves and how we're setting ourselves up. It's very easy to set yourself up for failure in writing. I've done it my whole life in many different ways. Um, through just like self-loathing and scheduling and the idea that, oh, I'm going to write when I feel inspired. That will never happen.
Yeah, I'm
There's
still waiting for
so
that.
many
30 years later,
no,
I'm still waiting for that. Come on in,
right,
inspiration.
exactly. And so I just we set ourselves up for failure more than anything else. And that's something I have had to learn the hard way and continue to learn all the time.
How are you setting yourself up for success as a creative now? Childcare.
Childcare, yeah. Dedicated work time.
Is it easier
Reading.
to take your work seriously now that it's successful? Are you more protective of your work time than you were before?
Maybe a little bit, although the reason the first book was written was because I really did take myself seriously, and so I don't really think that's changed. It was certainly validation for kind of taking a stance on that. Um, but I'm working the same as I was before, and it took me a long time to realize that had to happen. I was trying to squeeze it in a terrible times like the evening,
Oh
or
God.
I was trying to think, well, how can I just kind of do this on the side?
Mm.
And that's work. I'm sure that works for some people. That doesn't work for me. I can't do writing on the side. My brain doesn't work that way. I can't do that. So yeah, that it has been a very hard lesson to learn, but I think I've learned it. Yeah.
So
Many
one thing
more,
I've
many more lessons to learn.
many more lessons to learn. Me too. Me too. I hear a lot from creative women about guilt. Now you have four kids that are your oldest is
10,
nine,
almost
10.
10. Yeah.
When you're in your dedicated time at Panera or wherever you go now,
Yeah.
do you wrestle with an internal dialogue of I should be with them instead, or is that just like, oh, you got to be kidding me? No, this is my time. I relish it. I love it.
Yeah, I think sometimes I did. I wrote two books in Panera in the parking lot. We moved 2 months ago, and I have my own office. That's where I am now.
Oh yay! Oh, that's
It's been life
fantastic.
changing. Yeah, yeah. I did. I have had times of that for sure, especially when I'm up against a deadline and I'm working 5 days a week. I feel bad, not because I think I shouldn't be working, but because I know the toll it takes on my kids when I'm away.
Mm.
It's not that that's wrong or right. I think that's just part of motherhood. And I have a lot of conversations with women and my friends who are constantly struggling with this. And I think what we've come to realize is that feeling is not going to go away. There's no perfect situation here. You're always losing something. Um, and so I don't really feel guilt. I just feel that feeling of, oh, this is a lot. I'm working a lot. And so there's something that's missing out here, and that's just part of it. Um, you really can't have it all. You can just have some at some times. And, I try to do my best to have a good work life balance, but that can't always happen because that's just not the reality of writing book under deadline.
No, and
Um,
also it's not the reality of balance. I mean, balance is fluid, and we have this little thing that we balance on to strengthen our ankles for running, and you're always falling off.
yeah. 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 I do feel like when I had my fourth, which was an accident, unplanned, I do feel like I was kind of pushed off a ledge where I really don't often feel guilty about leaving my kids because it was so difficult. I was very depressed. I felt very weighted down. And so I've had to spend a lot of time, reclaiming, my physical body, my my mental energy, my work. And so I don't feel the guilt that I did maybe in early on in motherhood with maybe my first kids. Now I don't feel that way. And I also think that's fluid. How you're feeling as a mother, it just changes. I'm also getting older. I'm getting into my later 30s. And I think, you know, maybe in my late 20s, I felt a little bit differently, which I think is normal.
One of the things that I find fascinating is how, even in this time, it is so hard for some women to admit that raising kids is difficult. I got a review on Why Bother on Amazon, and a woman took me to task for saying that raising kids is on this list in the book of things that can cause a loss of desire, get up
Mm-hmm.
and go in your life. And she's just like, oh, this is awful. I can't believe this woman would say this. And I'm like, what planet are you living on where you're raising kids? Like
Yeah.
that, of course, you love them and you love it, but it is the hardest thing that anyone ever does. Do you get backlash about talking honestly about parenting in interviews like this and in your poems, or in general are people more like,
Every
thank you?
Every once in a while, I would say the most overwhelming response is me too. But
Hmm.
yeah, every once in a while that does happen. But I think most mothers can identify with that feeling. I think it's probably pretty universal. Um, so yeah, for the most part, no, I don't find that, but I also really try to tune out that noise as much as I can.
And do you do that by not spending much time on social media or?
Yeah, since I've written this second book, I really have spent a lot less time there. It's very emotionally draining for me, the good and the bad. And so I have really tried to step back. It was really starting to affect my mental health and writing. And so I did really have to take a step back from that. Yeah.
And is it getting sucked into approval that's difficult? Because I find that's more
Yeah.
addictive. I mean, the
Yeah.
bad reviews definitely can make me really stomp around my office and say some mean
Yeah.
things. But
Yeah.
but I think sometimes it's the approval or that sticks me more and makes me kind of get caught in that. Okay, how can I make more of that? Or
Yeah. Absolutely. That is the biggest addiction. And trying to the way Instagram works and social media works and the algorithm works is constantly improving your following. And you just kind of get stuck in this cycle of I have to keep performing here so that people
mm-hmm.
keep listening to what I have to say and buy my books. And that is just such a I don't know, a toxic place to be. And I have to stay there to some degree, but I've really started to pull back because I don't think it's helping the work. I think it's taking away from it and ultimately hurting me and hurting what I'm doing. And so yeah, I just have really pulled back. And I do feel bad because I have a lot of people that want to talk to me, which is wonderful. And so many kind messages, but I can't reply to them all, or I will spend all day, every day doing that. And it's taking away from what I'm trying to do not for everyone, but you know what I'm saying? I can't write another book if I'm spending all day going back and forth and trying to give people writing advice or publishing advice and um, engaging about what this poem means and what that poem means. We can get so close to anyone now. We can. Social media has given us access, myself included, to celebrities and writers and artists, and that's so wonderful. And yet, it also is a burden, and that is something I have tried to grapple with. And yeah, it's a double-edged sword because I've had so many incredible positive interactions. I've also had some really negative ones. And then the in between just really bogs me down, which is just looking through what people are sending me and trying to figure out what is not worth responding to, but what do I have the emotional energy for?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I get stuck in the cycle of guilt and wanting to say thank you because I'm so thankful, but also protecting my time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I also resent, and then this is really bad, but I resent that social media companies, for their own bottom line, are creating the standards that I have to,
Yeah.
like, sit up like a little dog and bark
Yeah.
and, yes, yes. And then I drop out and then I'm like, oh, I gotta start all over, and so it's trying to find that medium place of creating value for people and promoting your own work
Yeah.
authentically without feeling like you're just caught in this gerbil wheel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not in a good place with it right now, so I have nothing smart to say
I know.
about how to do that.
I get like that. I am coming up on doing press for a second book here that I'm going to get asked a lot about the internet, and I haven't really worked on my speech yet, but I feel like I'm going to have to come up with something to say that is smart and concise when because often I feel really rambly and really, because I'm so hot and cold with it. And then I feel, I don't know, I just get angry. And then that's not really what I want to come across as. I'm not, because I'm not really angry at Instagram, and I'm not angry at the people who are following me. I'm not even that angry at people who write unkind messages to me. I think I'm just angry on behalf of everyone that we're caught in this cycle where we're having to perform, where we are saying things we don't actually mean, when we're spreading misinformation, myself included, so easily. Um, that's what I'm angry at, and then that just doesn't ever come across well. So I guess I need to
That's
dedicate
that.
time to that.
Well, I think you could just listen to this part again and transcribe it. You just did a great job, because it is what part of it is a nuanced conversation.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
part of what book tours don't allow for too often are nuanced conversations.
yeah,
And the sound bites are not conducive to changing the landscape that we find ourselves in.
yeah, yeah.
So, speaking of the new book of poetry, do you think you could read a poem from it for us?
From the new book. Oh, sure.
Well, how about the new book and the old book?
Right. So the new book is, one side of the page are messages or comment threads, or I also have um, Brett Kavanaugh here to the Senate Judiciary Committee. So they're kind of hard. I'm happy to read them. They
They don't
they're hard
translate
to
as
read
well.
because I have to read. Would you like me to read the original? And then,
Sure, sure. And then and
um,
you're and the poem is almost a response,
yes, it's by, yes.
kind of a
This
call
is,
and response.
sure. This is from Chad. That's not his real name. This is the message he sent. I think it's funny how much you hate men and then go ahead and have this husband like he doesn't apply. Not buying your book, but if I was, I would get it for my daughters to show them how not to be. Even though you'll never see this, it's worth sharing that not all women think like you or believe men are inherently against women. They might even say they appreciate men. Can't fathom this? Maybe read a book outside your what kind of woman bubble. Sincerely, a man who believes his daughters can be both independent and polite. And here is the poem that goes with it, using his words. It's funny how men go ahead and have daughters, even though they can't fathom what daughters can be.
Mm. Hmm. I just, yeah. Oh, I can feel that. Ah, yeah. That's why I wanted to talk to you. It's exactly that. It's exactly that. Do you feel that when you read it back, or is it so familiar to you now you don't, it's gone, that I don't even know
Yeah,
the word
some
for
of
it.
that has
Fierceness
been,
for
yeah, a lot of that has dissipated only because when you are writing a book, you have to read things over and over
so
again.
many times.
So I don't feel that anymore. The power in what he has to say has really gone away for me. Um, I guess if I really thought about it and sat with it, I could get mad again. But for
Mhm.
now, I kind of feel like I had the last laugh, so I don't feel that much anymore.
This is an interesting form because I haven't seen the new book yet. It's in the mail somewhere. And so tell me about the idea of call and response, almost of responding to comments, because it's interesting off of our shared diatribe about the internet. Right, the some of that actually seems to have fueled the form of this book.
Yeah, I never meant to publish a book 1 year after the first one. I didn't ever thought I would do erasure poetry. It wasn't something I ever did before. Again, I just was a surprise. Just like the first one, I it started last summer, during a particularly difficult time on in our history. George Floyd had just been murdered, and things were very hot, very contentious. I posted some things about police reform. A woman wrote to me, pretty angry, and just on a whim, I didn't even think about it. I looked at the message. Usually, I delete messages like that. I kind of was looking at it and just it kind of rearranged in front of me, and so I took a screenshot and I blotted it out and I posted it. And that the response to it was so overwhelming. There are it kind of just showed me there are so many people at odds with other people on the internet, and in their personal lives. And I kind of kept doing that. It felt like just like a party trick. And I started seeing poems everywhere, billboards and my spam email, just kind of taking words from things and making new pieces with them. And yeah, it really took off. I was asked to write a book of them. I said no 2 or 3 times. I don't want to do this. I don't want to look at messages like this. It felt too difficult. I was talked into it. it was hard. It was like COVID. I was quarantined. I was homeschooling my kids when I really didn't want to do that. Trying to write in parking lots, borrowing Wi-Fi because I didn't have my own office. It was a very dark time, to be honest, writing this book, not just because of the content, but what was going on around me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy with how it turned out. And I think there is something to be said just about this moment in time, reading it. But yeah, it was not something I intended to do, but yeah, it's turned out really cool.
That's interesting that, what I take from that, or what I feel, is how, as an artist and creatives, it's not always about fun or pleasant. It's about, this thing is presenting itself, and am I going to grapple with it or not? And no right answer.
Yeah.
But you grappled with it. How does that different than your first book, writing your first book? Was it a completely different experience?
Yeah, it was completely different experience. The first book, and I know this sounds cliche, felt like something that I had wanted to write and had inside me for so long. I sat down to that book and it just came. It was hard to write at times, of course, and there were moments of doubt and writer's block and all the things that come with writing a book, but it felt like it was there all along. It felt like something that I had been writing around for a long time, writing thrillers and personal narrative, and taking all these themes that I was writing around for a long time, and then finally just saying it. And which is such a wonderful thing about poetry. You really get to the point quickly. And so it was very fun to write, only because it felt like scratching an itch that had always been there.
So many different guests on this podcast have talked about that. Like, there's this way about the creative process where we're circling, and whether it's circling what the project is really about, or finding the form to get to what we really want to say. I just what is it about our brains that want to not let us go there?
Yeah. I know. I know. And it's frustrating and so hard to describe. And, people ask me for advice, and I feel like the last person on earth, because I circled the drain for so long. So I don't know what to say. I guess you have to just do that. I don't know any shortcuts. I only know the hard way.
Did the title for the first book, What Kind of Woman, did that come before you started writing, in the middle,
No.
afterwards?
No, it was called Another Bird entirely when I submitted it.
Wait, the title was Another Bird entirely?
Yeah, which was a line from one of the poems. Yeah,
I like that too.
Yeah, and my editor picked out What Kind of Woman, which is part of another poem, and it just felt like it fit really well. Right. So, yeah.
Do you want to read us a poem from that book?
Oh, sure. Mind? Sure. I never pick ahead. I just kind of...
Yeah. What's calling to you in the moment?
Yeah, well, wherever my finger stops. Actually, I can read the poem where the title comes from. It's called Some Nights. Some nights she walks out to the driveway where the lilacs bloom and lies down on the warm pavement, even though the neighbors will see and wonder what kind of woman does such things. There she stares up at the slender moon and thinks about the baby albatross filled with discarded spoons, or the time a friend asked what she was working on these days, and she answered, "Who has the time?" even though she meant something else entirely. Across the lawn, the crickets sing while the earth lets out its tired breath and wanders through the trees to greet her.
It does feel really different than the new book, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, these are full-length poems, and kind of a full length collection of poetry, while the second one is kind of a little baby book. That's what I call her. She's just tiny, little baby book, and yeah, kind of addressing internet culture with these erasure poems, which was, yes, a very different process because I only had the words people gave me. I couldn't make up my own words.
Yeah, which is also great to have those restrictions. I mean,
Yeah,
annoying, but
sure.
also it takes away some of that fear of choosing. So when you're writing we'll call them the big poems,
Yeah.
can you take me into that process a little bit? Do you collect words? Do you write notes to yourself throughout the day? Yeah.
Yeah, all those things. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I write little phrases, little bits and pieces of conversation. If I'm reading a book and I see a word that I love, I write that down to use for later. Yeah, I read as much as I can. Um, I kind of use that dedicated work time to kind of take all those pieces and put it together. Some pieces took me 15 minutes, other ones took me, a few months or longer, which is always frustrating. And sometimes I've just realized, that's for a different time. I have lots of half poems, so yeah, it's kind of a process that's hard to describe because I'll read poems like I just did, and I'll think I have no idea how I wrote that. If that
Mhm.
makes any sense, it kind of
Totally.
happened, but I don't really remember it. I don't remember writing out that poem like that. I think it it kind of just happened, and it's so hard to describe how that comes together. It's almost like you're writing with one eye shut, if that makes any sense, or um, without really looking at it.
Yeah, it's almost like you
Yeah,
don't want to look. The feeling that I get is I don't want to look too closely. I don't want to
sure.
think too much.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's almost a letting go or relaxing
Yeah.
that has to happen. But when you talk about reading a lot and paying attention, it feels like what I know is that's going in to my body and into my
Yeah.
brain that I can call on
Yeah.
when I need to. When you're writing, do you get lost in flow? Or is that a rare thing?
Sure. Yeah. Have you seen the movie Soul?
I haven't. I
You
haven't,
should
and I
watch it.
want
It's all
to.
about that. It's literally about that. Yeah. Yes, I do. I absolutely love that feeling. It's like a high, and I love it and live for it and will do anything to have it. It's addicting. It's addicting
It
and
is.
it's
It's like
really
what's going on in
frustrating.
your brain is
Yeah.
it's like the optimal brain conditions when you're in flow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so frustrating to have, let's say, 3 days of work and have it not happen. It's probably my lowest points in writing is when I spend days trying to get it and can't find it, which is usually a signal to me that I just need to read.
Mm.
That kind of jolts me back. But yeah, I do. I love that.
And who are
It's
some of your
wonderful.
favorite poets you've been reading lately, or books, or novels, or whatever?
Oh my goodness! Whenever someone asks me
I
like
know,
books I've
I
reading, I can't think of a single book I've ever read.
know,
I
I
can't
know.
think. Have I ever read a book? I don't know. I don't know anybody's name. I don't know anyone who I enjoy. I don't know. I'm actually reading an incredible book right now. It's called Animal by Lisa. I don't know how to say her last name. Um,
Oh, Tato,
Tato,
yes, and
yeah, I
she
would say
wrote,
Tato. She
yeah,
wrote Three Women.
three women, yeah.
She's become a friend of mine, even though I obviously can't pronounce her last name, Tato.
I won't tell her.
You don't say things out loud, and then you kind of get in interviews. I always get tripped up, like, oh, good, I don't know how to say her name.
Me too.
Lisa's book is called Animal. It's a novel. Absolutely love it. I also just read the new Miriam Tao's book. She's a Canadian writer.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote Women Talking, and she came out with a new book called Fight Night. That comes out this fall. Incredible book. Before that, I had such a long streak of not reading. I was moving. I felt terrible. It's almost like if I don't read for a while, I start to feel sick to my stomach over it. Like I can't, I'm like, what am I doing? Just read something. And then I can't find, and I'm trying and I don't like this. And anyway, I having these two incredible books has been such a gift. I have really been in the flow. So my all-time favorite writer is Margaret Atwood, but as far as poets go, Wanda Coleman and Sharon Olds, Mary Oliver, Maya Angelou, just incredible women writers who have put out some work that is life-changing. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is that feeling when you're when the pandemic started and people were like, I can't even read a book. That was all I was doing.
Same.
It was like,
Oh,
I
same.
need to escape this world right now. And how can you not be reading? Like, I'm spending like way too much time in bed reading. But then when you can't find that thing that is exactly what you need in that moment, it is a terrible feeling
Yeah.
for a
What did you
reader.
read in the pandemic? I read some incredible books in the
Can I
pandemic.
remember that? I can't remember. I have to go back and look at
Well,
this. I've
I
never
know
read a
I
book at
can't
all.
either, but I can think of some times when we were really housebound that I was like, that's all I did. Like I read The Dutch House then, and a few other like big books that I hadn't read that were so good. You know when people tell you to read this book over and over, and then you're kind of like, well, I'm not going to read that. Stop telling me.
It's like,
That's
do
how I am. I'm
that.
like, please stop. I don't. Stop telling me to read The Dutch House. And I read it, and I was like, oh, okay, well,
I
I
have
read
that
that and a few
same
other
thing.
ones.
Like, don't tell me what to read. Don't tell
I
me what to
know.
read.
I
It's
didn't
like,
read the Da Vinci Code for so long. I didn't read the Da Vinci Code for like 15 years later. And then I finally read it and I was like, hey, have you read the Da Vinci Code? People were like, I read that. There's been like 3 movies. What are you talking about? And I'm like, no, but it's really good.
So maybe we won't get our most up-to-date reads from you.
No, yes, exactly. I sometimes really balk at that, but yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask this last question of everybody. What will you learn next?
Oh, I love that question. Well, it's hard to predict what you will learn. I guess it's more like what I want to learn.
That's a good that I got
Because
that
I
from
don't
Kristen Neff. She said the same thing. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should change the question.
because I can't really know what I'll learn.
Right.
I can't really guess that. I don't know. I hope I learn. I hope I learn to tune out some of the pressure, as we talked about, to plug in and constantly promote myself. I feel like I have, like I said, pulled back and I'm learning that, but I don't feel like I've learned it yet. I feel like I'm in the process of balancing that. And I hope that a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, if I ever get the privilege of being on podcasts or in interviews again, that I can say that I've learned that. That's what I would love to learn all the way. And maybe there's no way to do that because internet and social media and all that is constantly changing. But I would love to find boundaries that are easier for me to follow. That's what I hope. And as far as learning with writing, I my favorite artists are the risk takers, the ones who just pick up and do something totally different. And I hope I can keep doing that. That is something that I hope I continue to learn over and over the rest of my life, that it's okay to switch. And it doesn't matter if people are expecting another this or another that. People expected me to keep writing motherhood essays and I stopped, and it was really hard. I got a lot of pushback for that and it was wonderful, but now I'm going to be stuck in this. And so I hope I keep learning that. I don't think that's something you can just learn and then never have to learn again. I'm someone who has to learn lessons over and over. So I hope that's something I keep learning.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's brilliant. Me too. All those things.
Yeah.
Kate, thank you for writing your poems and thank you for taking time to talk to us. It was delightful.
This was a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for having me.